Welcome to our training about dispositions today and how to take a look at applicants or even existing teachers that we have and try to determine what are their dispositions, what is it that makes that individual tick. And by the end of today, we're going to take a look at several positions. Now, focusing on teachers, but as a school district, we have more than just teachers. And this applies to any position that we would hire for, whether it be our teachers, our bus drivers, our janitors, other position that's in the district. We want to make sure that we're hiring the right individuals, because the bottom line is our kids. We're doing everything for the students. And whatever capacity that is, we want to make sure they're college, career, and life ready. And the way to do that is making sure that we put the individuals in front of them in whatever capacity that is. So through today's training, what we're looking to understand is, what is a disposition? We've used this word a few times already, but do we really know how it relates when we're doing hiring? Also, why are they important? Which is going to answer why I'm here today. Why are we here today? And then also, why is it important to the students? And then finally, we want to know, okay, well, if we're talking about dispositions, how am I going to measure it? Because a disposition is not some concrete thing that I can go to and say that, here is exactly this person's disposition. There's a little bit of interpretation that goes along with it. But we want to have a method of interpreting that that's consistent amongst everybody in this room, if you're on an interview panel, whatever the case may be. So we want to make sure that we have consistency. So I want to take you back in time when you're a student. So you're no longer a coach, an assistant principal, a teacher. You're a student back in high school, grade school, elementary school. Think of your favorite teacher. If you would, for about 15 seconds, talk to the person next to you and come up with some of those words that describes your favorite teacher. Okay, let's just go around real quick in each group, maybe throw out a couple words that you came up with.
Friendly. And trustworthy.
I would say fun. School.
Yeah. Okay.
Engaging.
Engaging. Energetic. Okay. We hear all these words. What do these words really describe? What would you say that those types of words are that we've used so far? Yeah, character traits. But where's the content knowledge? Where's the ability to use Marzano's strategy? A lot of those words, these are all adjectives that are describing an individual. And so it kind of gets back to when we're talking about dispositions. It's a large part of what makes up our favorite teacher, evidenced by the words that we came up with. We didn't hear a whole lot of those content knowledge things. It's an important piece of the puzzle, but just by your answers, I think we realize that it really is the person that's in front of us that makes that a good teacher. So now we want to take the opposite approach here. After we kind of look at some of these traits that basically if we were to quantify these in sentence format, these are some of the things you were saying that this teacher enjoyed and cared about us. They looked for the good in all of us. They made it fun, and that's usually a word that you hear a lot of, that they're going to make it fun. They believed in me. They were challenging, and then they saw us as unique. They treated us with respect, and that's something that's just so critical for all of our students, because that's all they really want, and if you provide that to them, then they should flourish. So now, conversely, let's look at your worst teacher. Again, we'll take 20 seconds, and what are the first words that come to mind when you think of your worst teacher? And we'll go the opposite direction this time. We'll start with the ladies. What are some of the words that you came up with?
Unapproachable.
Unapproachable?
Apathetic.
Apathetic?
Yeah. They didn't like us. They felt like they didn't like us. Scary. Very
Scary.
Intimidating.
Intimidating? Kind of looks like that. Gentlemen?
Unfair.
Unfair? Okay. And then some of the words that usually come up, some of which we hit on as you were going around and this. Again, it gets back to these are all things that are kind of character traits that we mentioned earlier. So things that, when you're interviewing someone, can you really look and find these types of pieces of information? Because in an interview, you would expect that someone's done their homework, they've come prepared, And they're going to give you these perfect, wonderful answers to all the questions that you ask. Which is why we want to take the questions that we ask, because you can actually get around those remarks and try to figure out, do they have items on this list, or do they have items on the previous list that we took a look at. So if we look at favorite teacher characteristics based on a national survey that was taken, we have 3 areas. We have knowledge, we have teaching skills, and we have dispositions. Now if you were to quantify this, which one do you think has the highest percentage in the responses? Anybody willing to throw out a guess?
Knowledge.
Okay. Well, think back to what we did in the very beginning when we were thinking about favorite teachers or least favorite teachers.
Disposition.
Anybody willing to put a guess on what percent of the respondents went with the dispositions as their most important factor for their favorite teacher?
95.
Okay, a little high. It was actually 75% of all respondents said that a teacher's disposition was the most important of what they did for them. Teaching skills, 19%. Knowledge, 6%. So overwhelming majority, we're looking at people's dispositions. So that kind of stresses the importance of why we're here today and what we're talking about this whole topic. So dispositions, what are we talking about? Let's throw out a definition just so we're speaking the same language. But we're looking at one's natural, and I'll come back to this, it's bolded and underlined for a reason, but a natural mental and emotional outlook or mood, which can include your attitudes, your beliefs, your interests, your appreciations, your values, and modes of adjustment. The reason that natural is such an important piece of it is think of in the classroom, heat of the moment. You've got a group of students that are kind of goofing off in the back of the room. How does the teacher respond? It's those types of situations that is going to draw out those natural responses that they're going to have. And that's where you're really going to see the true colors of an individual. So how do we determine what these natural emotions and tendencies are going to be? We're today going to base a lot of what we talk about on the work of Dr. Arthur Combs from the University of Florida. He spent his entire career working on perceptual inferences and reading people's dispositions in education and deciding what really is going to make a good teacher. He says that people behave in terms of how the world appears to them. So those reactions that they have, their behaviors, it's going to be the symptom of perceptions. So they're stuck in a situation, something happens, whatever they do, their behavior that comes out, that's the symptom. That's the way they've been conditioned, the way they've been brought up, and the way that they've learned. So you're going to get a clear picture of their behavior in kind of these settings that might occur in an educational world. Perceptions are they're cumulative and they change very slowly. This all starts back when we were kids. So maybe when you tried to go to mom and ask mom for, can I do this? And she said, no. So now you go talk to dad and you try to get dad to do something. It's those types of things that you learn over a lifetime, and that's what we're really trying to find out when we're interviewing people, we're screening people, you know, what are those things that they've learned over their entire lifetime. Fortunately, because we're in education and we love rubrics, we have a rubric that we'll be able to use today when measuring people's dispositions. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's a very difficult area to measure and quantify because it's up to our interpretation. But if we could have a tool that's research-based that allows us to kind of quantify what's going on with these people's dispositions, it makes our life a little bit easier, especially considering that most interviews are a panel style in the education world. So you might have 3 to 5 people interviewing one individual. Well, 3 to 5 people are going to hear different messages, so this might help make sure that everybody's talking that same language. Kind of what we're doing is we're reading behavior backwards, because you're going to ask a question in an interview, and you're going to get a very short answer. You don't have a whole lot of information to make your inferences based off of, so we truly are working backwards based on that limited amount of information that we receive. Understanding dispositions. So let's kind of start getting specific to the district, and really to any district. One of the pages that I gave you is going to give you, it has 4 categories on it, and it's listed dispositions of effective leaders. The Combs model applied. These are the most important pieces of the puzzle about what we're talking about today. What we're trying to accomplish is to measure these 4 categories of every individual that we hire into our district. We want to know their dispositions towards their self. Are these individuals upbeat? We want to make sure they're not self-centered. We want to make sure that they can identify with others. If they meet those categories and they meet that criteria, then we know that we've got someone that's willing to get great and that's going to move forward because they have that positive energy. Dispositions toward others. This is a key for anybody in education because you're working with students all the time. So you want to make sure that when they look at students or anybody, coworkers even for that matter, that they see people are able, they're worthy, and that they're dependable. So you don't want to be micromanaging our students all the time. Sometimes that, as a teacher, you have to do that. But for the majority of the time, you want to let them explore and let them learn and kind of guide them. Dispositions about purpose. See the big picture, and you want to keep objectives and priorities. In most districts, and as most of you have probably known throughout your educational careers, there's a lot of initiatives that are brought up maybe every year or every few years. Things are always changing in education. And it's easy for some people to say, you know what, I've been doing it this way my whole career, it works just fine, why do I need to change? And come on, I'm pretty good. But that's the fear that we have, and that's what we're trying to avoid, because we want people to get by that, I got to learn something new this year, more strategies. If they get beyond that and see that this is beneficial because the leadership of our district realizes that this is going to help kids achieve greatness, then that's going to make sure that we're hiring the right individuals. And then finally, we just want a general frame of reference. You know, do these individuals put people first? And do they have the ability to build relationships? So as you go through today, and as you sit through interviews, or maybe when you're looking at applications, when you're trying to decide who to hire next, more than anything, these 4 categories are going to be critical to ensure that we bring the right individuals into our district, and really into any district. So I mentioned there's a rubric. And right on the back side of that page is what the rubric looks like that we're going to be using today. And it simply has 4 categories that we talked about. Now this is small, which is why you have a copy in front of you. But I just want to give you a basic understanding of how this works, because this will be the focus of what we're doing today. So we have our 4 categories: perceptions of self, others, purpose, general frame of reference. Within each category, we have a definition. We have answers that show that an individual identifies with these categories. And then we also have answers that would show that they do not identify with these particular categories. So you see a scale of 7 down through 1 for each of these particular categories. The ones that we're looking to hire are going to answer in the 7, 6, and the 5 range. The ones we want to shy away from, where maybe so we just don't have enough information about an individual, are the ones that are in this 3, 2, and 1 range. But I would think in an interview process, having sat through several interviews, the ones that truly shows the 7, 6, and 5, they're going to show their true colors. Feel their enthusiasm, you feel the energy, you feel all of these answers that we want. And it's pretty easy to not have to decide, well, you know, I've got this person, it's a 3, I really need to fill this position, I guess I could try to do it. And we're lucky by using this information that we don't have to make tough decisions about, do I want to settle? That we can actually go to, yes, here's someone that's going to make a difference for our students. So those last 2 slides that we've talked about, the 4 categories, the actual rubric, this is the centerpiece of what we're going to work on and really what the districts continue to do moving forward. You can use this rubric in a few ways. We're actually going to focus on 2 today. We have what's called a human relations incident, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but that's just a fancy question that we're going to ask applicants, or you could even ask in the interview process. You could do classroom observation. Now, I do get questions in these trainings that says, well, you know, this is great information. Can we use it for our existing employees? Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously we have tenure laws that state that after so many years an individual is ours. We have them. So we hope that we can improve them and get them to want to be better. So we're pretty much building the culture within our district. We're backing up and saying, okay, kind of hitting the reset button and making sure that every hire going forward is going to go through this dispositional interview so that we make sure that we've hit those categories that we just talked about. The interview, we'll talk about interview. Actually have sample interview questions that you can ask that are going to not necessarily trick a candidate, probably questions that they didn't prepare for. Because just like most of us, we probably practice before we go to an interview, and I would expect anyone else was going to do the same. But if you give them that question that they weren't expecting, now we might get that natural response that we're looking for to see what are their true colors. And we can assess ourselves. We can look at this rubric and say, well, where do I think I fall? And if we see some shortcomings and some challenges that maybe we face within a category, we can say, you know what, I know it's a slow process. It takes time to change my perceptions and my dispositions, but I can do it because I'm aware of what we're looking for. And I think that is an important thing to do just kind of on your own, is look at this and say, where do I fall? And knowing everybody in this room, we're all in the 7, 6, and 5 range, so we don't have to worry about it. But that's something that you have as a tool that you can take a look at. I want to talk about the interview first, and then we'll get into the human relations incident. When you're in an interview, now you're the person asking the questions, start out your interview like normal. Nothing really needs to be different. Person that you're talking to is probably rehearsed very carefully some very specific questions. So kind of lull them to sleep, so to speak, by asking them those questions that they know are coming, that they've practiced for. Their answers are self-reported information. So you know, how much stock can you put really into what they're telling you? Some things are easy because we have resumes, we have their application, we can see all those black and white items. It's the gray items that are a little bit tricky. We're going to get beyond these rehearsed remarks and try to get them in a conversation. I think most of us probably have found that's the way that our interviews go. It ends up being more conversational because that's really where you're going to get someone to loosen up. We don't want them to be so nervous and we're scaring them with some of these difficult questions. But we want to make sure that they feel comfortable that they can, because as they get comfortable, that's when they're going to start giving you more information that maybe they didn't practice. Reflective listening. We're just trying to make sure, well, if I were in this situation, what would I have done? Kind of just absorb what they're telling you and then let it all sink in before we make any snap judgments. And we already do this, but allow candidates to ask questions, which takes us back to the part where we're engaging them in a conversation. And there are no absolute right or wrong answers. We may be looking to hear a specific answer, just because they get an answer doesn't mean that it's wrong because it's not what we wanted to hear. It might be very telling. It might be giving us some information that will help us make a decision that, maybe we shouldn't hire this person. Or, you know what, this person's the one. No question about it. We're going to go with this individual. So just a few examples that I wanted to throw out, and you have these already. And I actually have a few more for you as well. But, look at the categories. Disposition about self, what could you ask? Describe your perfect day. Probably not a question that you would normally prepare for. We'd probably be worried about lesson plans and how I differentiate my instruction. But describing my perfect day? Anybody been asked that question in an interview? I'm just curious, what kind of answer, if you don't mind?
My son was just born, so my perfect day was wrapped around my family and a sporting event or something like that. And it wasn't educational in nature, so I always had that thought, do I throw the educational piece in there or do I keep it personal? So I kept it personal.
Yep. And anyone else in the room have experience with maybe giving a little more personal answers instead of education? Trying to go that route? And were you comfortable doing that? It was no big deal?
Well, I think they sort of get walled into that conversational aspect if you like to talk to people, which most teachers do like to talk to people. But then, like, after you gave the answer, I thought, was I supposed to say that? I did that sort of, what was I supposed I supposed to answer? Because I'm not really sure where they're going with it.
Right.
It was just very unexpected, and so in the heat of the moment, yeah, well, of course, your perfect day is going to be about what you pretty much live personally, and then because there's that separation between career and individual.
Correct.
And so it's just sort of, ooh, did I do it right?
And I think those type of answers, even though they may not feel educational in nature, are extremely telling because you get an idea of the priorities. If you're interviewing a teacher who's talking about family and their or children and they're very excited about that, that's going to translate into the classroom because they are a kid-oriented person. So you're really able to draw a lot of inferences about a person just through what makes them tick. If their perfect day was to lay on the beach, do absolutely nothing, maybe have a little umbrella drink, and watch the tide roll in, that doesn't really show me a whole lot of motivation and desire to want to do anything. And maybe that's the way that an individual is kind of in the background. Now maybe if you lay on the beach, but you're in a foreign country, so you want to learn the language so that you can speak, maybe you tweak your answer a little bit. Now you've got something that shows, okay, now I'm going to drive forward, and I have that ability to want to do something. So you can glean some information from their responses, even if it feels personal in nature. What problems do people bring you? So again, it's showing, when I look at myself, how am I? Dispositions towards others, you could ask, how would your colleagues describe you? And I think that's a pretty common question. Or tell about a situation in which you helped a person or taught a significant lesson. So that could be an educational setting, but it could be outside in the classroom as well. And then maybe just a general frame of reference. Probably a lot of us at some point in time have been asked that dreaded question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But I think a better way to ask that question, especially in an education setting, because I may want to teach for the next 20 years. Maybe I don't necessarily want to change positions, so that answer might feel like I'm not giving the right answer. But if you say, if your life works out the best you can imagine, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And that changes the dynamic of that question. It's a very standard question that shows up all the time. But now it's got a tweak on it that makes it hopefully a little more comfortable, a little more conversational, and you're probably going to get a better answer from them instead of, well, in 5 years, I hope to be doing your job, which is what you usually coach people to answer when they get asked that question. And then how do you maintain balance in your life between work and play? Probably no more important area than to be able to do the two. It's very easy to get wrapped up. I'm going to go home and I'm going to grade papers and write lesson plans all night long. I'm going to do this all weekend and just really burn themselves out. So if they can balance and find a way to do things that are fun and recharge the batteries, then those are the people that we can feel that not only are they good people to hire, but they're going to do this job very well for a long time to come. That's what we're hoping to do.